2016 was a great year for animation, with somewhere around 20 being released in theaters this year alone, having some of the most groundbreaking works of animation I have seen in years, and others just not so glamorous. So I'm going to list my picks for the best and worst animated features of 2016. Now there are only two rules to this. 1. This is a list of animated features, so they must be animated and reach the limitations of a feature film. And 2. They must have had an official theatrical release date in America. Now I just want to say that these are just my opinions. If you disagree with me, that's fine. It's just my subjective view, based off of objective, infallible facts. With that out of the way, here is my top 8 best and worst animated movies of 2016. In 2 lists of 4.
Dear gods, you're so divine in each and every way. To you we pray.
When I first came across the trailer for Sausage Party, I honestly thought it was a big joke. I mean, look at this. This is like an SNL skit after Charlie Sheen couldn't hide food fight any longer. This can't be real, right? And evidently, I wasn't the only one caught off guard. Now, I'm not much of a Seth Rogen fan. I honestly think movies like Superbad or Knocked Up or Zack and Miri Make a Porno. Are you fucking kidding? Just cringy and stupid. But hey, he made the interview, so he's not all bad. Well, I guess you don't judge a book by its cover, or movie by its— shut up, you know what I mean. In case you haven't heard of Sausage Party, it's sort of like Toy Story meets Love Hungry from Tales from the Dark Side, just with a sprinkle of religious. I just realized that a lot of you have no idea what I'm talking about. Let me try that again. It's kind of like a good version of Food Fight. In a charming little supermarket, a diverse and non-subtly racist bunch of groceries sing a cheery song to the unknowing humans that don't even realize they are actually alive, only to later find out everything they believed lying outside the walls of the supermarket is a great big cozy lie. It's simple and rather unoriginal, but filled with mature, sometimes cringe-fest edgy humor and lots of sexual imagery. Yet behind the curtain of maturely immature humor and non-apologetic vulgarity, we find a fairly philosophical commentary on cultural diversity, religion, and a little bit of existentialism. And that orgies will solve the world's problems. It's crass and insensitive, yet it's strangely refreshing. Likely a product of the overly sensitive politically correct culture being forced down our throats. It's appetizing to simply refresh our palates with something little unwholesome yet reasonably balanced. Maybe not the best thing for you, but it's pretty satisfying. Alright, so be honest. Did any of you even know this came out this year? I barely did, and neither did anyone else, it seems. I found out only 2 days before it released in theaters, and on opening day, there was only one person in the theater with me. Made from the amazing game series, Ratchet & Clank may not be as bad as the standard video game adaptation movie, but it comes off just as flat. Being an adaptation of the story of the first game, Ratchet & Clank the movie follows the plot and style of the newer remake for PS4, and it literally follows it word for word. In a galaxy far, far away, we meet Ratchet, a rare Lombax and enthusiastic gadgeteer / aspiring hero. After he finds a robot he names Clank falling from the sky, he clumsily fumbles his way through the plot to save— well, nothing at all, really. Ratchet & Clank the movie feels like a collection of cutscenes from the game, mainly due to it actually being a collection of cutscenes from the game. It's weird that this works one way but not the other. The reason is because there's far more of the world well established by the environment and its silly small moments. But with this, any scene that wasn't straight from the game comes off as just heavy exposition and awkward fitted humor to make up for the real humor they lost. It makes me question who the intended audience was. Anyone that is familiar enough with the series would either not enjoy it or just be confused over the half-answered buzzwords that are dropped through the movie, and its rushed exposition that is simply vomited at you. Anyone I can imagine would be jumping to see this would likely have either played the game or just watched a Let's Play. I mean, you do realize the internet exists, right? Right. It might be decent to just fill someone in on the series, but it just seems pointless to even exist. Let's just pray that Sly Cooper is handled with a little bit more creativity. This was a pretty good time for Disney, with nearly 20 movies released by them alone, but it really seems their big break this year, aside owning Marvel and Star Wars, was mostly remaking old IPs in newer, smoother, blander styles with the help of CGI. Or they could just continue an old one. So 13 years after the release of Finding Nemo, they released the sequel, Finding Dory. Just seems a little late, you know? You would think that most people old enough to remember would just no longer be interested in animated kids' movies. I said most. Reprising her role as the titular character, Ellen DeGeneres plays the forgetful Dory, a character who, while a bit funny, was always a bit annoying to me as well. Just being a one-note joke through Finding Nemo and acting as a means to just run the characters into trouble. Which is weird, cause her impairments goes from being a crutch for minor humor and cheap conflict in the last movie, to being a far more crippling disability in this film, which somehow made her a far more interesting and enjoyable character. I think we've all dealt with a family member or loved one that wasn't quite all there. The confusion, the frustration, and general feeling of either being useless or feeling the weight of being the crutch for another person. Picking up a year after the previous movie, Dory unearths memories of her parents teaching her how to find her way home. After this startling recollection, Dory is driven to find her family, quickly leading Marlin and Nemo into several dangerous situations. Soon after getting captured and taken to a marine rehabilitation center, with a cast of physically impaired marine life while Marlin attempts to do as the title says, find Dory. The theme of ableism is a strong message throughout the film. While the general theme of the movie is accepting and coping with disabilities, this film goes more for a personal overcoming your limitations and finding the means to do so, not only applying to just a truly disabled person, but for any of us that are plagued with self-doubt and pessimistic self-loathing. God, this writing sucks! Overall, it's a good message to anyone, wrapped up in a package of beautiful animation and talented voice work. Certain tales are truly timeless. Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, Aesop's Fables, all having their retellings and reimaginings. You would be hard-pressed to find a book much older than the life and strange adventures of Robinson Crusoe, at least stemming from Western culture. A book that was made out to be the true autobiography of its titular character Robinson Crusoe and his tales of desperate survival of shipwreck, slavery, and cannibalism. What a perfect story for kids! In this modern retelling, we follow a group of the only 6 animals on a tiny island, led by a parrot that's trying a little too hard to sound like Jesse Eisenberg. After finding a wrecked ship on their beach, they find the clumsy, bumbling Robinson Crusoe, who they soon reluctantly assist in survival before they are attacked by not cannibals, but a family of vindictive cats. It's like the true story of New Zealand. This movie actually reminds me a lot of The Magic Voyage, seeming surprisingly similar in general presentation and tone. The animation is passable, and while the story is a complete offshoot from its original source material, it's not terribly offensive or overly pandering to its intended audience. Not really much else I could say. Overall, it's not a terrible movie, but incredibly unremarkable and unmemorable, which is a little sad because you could tell they actually did try at the very least. The Little Prince didn't make it to theaters due to the cowardly turned backs of Paramount Films. Luckily for us, Netflix picked it up. And it had a theatrical release date, so it counts for this list. I was rather enthralled by the trailer from the start, so I had high hopes for this movie. And it turned out to be even more than I expected. Literally more. The Little Prince feels like 3 different stories Frankenstein together, with a slow, plodding plot of overly ambitious girl whose entire life is literally planned for her by her zealous mother, with the musing stories of an eccentric old coot scattered between that harsh, strict reality, right before veering off the road straight into Brazil. But the movie! Everything about The Little Prince feels eclectic and somewhat without focus, dabbling in many styles and juggling several narratives at a time. And that's the strange thing about it. It's a movie that somehow does all the wrong things right, being like a 3-car pileup of metaphors and life lessons. However, it does suffer slightly from just being a little overwhelming, not focusing on a simple message, but piling on an entire bag full of interpretations on life and growing old. The Little Prince is simply a movie that makes you think. Think on who you are and for what reasons, and that's why I love it. And yes, it is high on this list because I'm a pretentious artsy faggot. So thanks, Netflix. You brought us nothing but greatness. Oh, God damn it, Netflix. It's one thing to have an okay group make something decent, but when you have some of the best in the industry, from writers to animators, for you to simply make something that's okay seems far worse in my book. This was easily the most boring movie I watched a whole year, which is so disappointing because it looks great and has such a grand atmosphere. But you begin to realize that beneath its beautiful surface that it's just hollow inside. The Little Prince may have suffered a bit from firing too much at the audience that becomes overwhelming, but the BFG suffers greatly from loading an entire Chekhov's revolver and never firing a shot. The BFG tells you nothing about this vibrant world it displays, giving elaborate names to things and showing off very curious scenes that fill you with more questions and never alludes to an answer. I frown upon a movie that treats an audience like they're stupid by explaining everything immediately after. To just say something and have nothing to fill in that empty space feels not only lazy but like you didn't have anything to begin with. Just a bunch of meaningless props and MacGuffins. The BFG was just the movie equivalent of "Whoa, nice graphic!" And to me, that just comes off as soulless. Don't act so surprised. This may seem predictable, but I tried. I honestly tried to remove some of my biases from this. But even with that, Zootopia is just such a well-designed, beautiful, and downright meaningful work of animation for today. Not only did it create yet another fresh new wave of furries to the world, but it just has that old Disney feel, fully actualized in a modern way, being charming, vibrant, and topical. I have seen quite a few anthropomorphic worlds created before, but I don't think any holds the level of realism and detail that Zootopia captures, accommodating animals of greatly varied size and ecosystems, but in a way that remains grounded in a sense of reality, even to details that most probably wouldn't even notice. Zootopia is a world made by animals for animals, which captures a unique sense of diversity, but we quickly see that everything is not so perfect in this melting pot, as much of the prejudices and mistrust between not just predator and prey animals, but almost every facet of city living. Yeah, even with such a kid-friendly theme and look, this movie is not afraid to bring up some very mature topics, from prejudice, classism, to downright racism, even to more subtle messages of sexuality and personal identity. I could go on about the story and everything the film says, but I already have a video where I do just that. Go check it out right here. With its strangely relatable and expressive characters, with a bright and immersive world and style, Zootopia may not just be the best animated film of this year, but now one of my personal favorites. But for every good there is an evil, every great piece of art a sinister antithesis to undermine everything that was achieved. Well, let's do this. My god, just look at this. I mean, really look at it. Boy, am I happy to finally have a movie that I neither fence ride a boring list of good and bads, or jerk it off to completion. Norm of the North is flat out awful, almost to an alarming level that I am truly concerned who it's even meant for. The entire movie has that cheap straight-to-DVD feel. In fact, it was meant to be straight-to-DVD, with simplified models that move with sporadic flexibility and weightlessness that they might as well just be replaced with wacky waving inflatable tube mans from outside of a car lot, and no one would be none the wiser. After a vegetarian talking bear finds humans building condos out in the middle of the frozen tundras of the Arctic, he goes off into the city to abandon the plot entirely for an hour until realizing that the movie is pointless and you throw it into trash. This movie masquerades as some form of environmental, anti-corporate message to only throw off the mask and twerk in your face. It lacks any substance to a mature viewership, and if used to entertain children, well, we may have to euthanize that batch. In 2016, with films like Zootopia, Kubo, and The Little Prince leading the road to a new golden age of animation, I'm not only disappointed that such a film was allowed on the big screen, but defiant to believe that it could even be made in such a year. But such a short glimpse doesn't even describe how terrible of an experience this was. Yeah, I think you know what that means.